Hi folks, my name is Millennial Smark, and I'm back at it again with another video. Some may say a very controversial video. Depends how you look at it. You see the title, you see the thumbnail. Hopefully you read the community post before you seen said title and see said thumbnail. So I literally gave you multiple warnings before you clicked on the video to let you know the narrative that I'm promoting inside said video. Now, I'm going to have some numbers and stats to back up everything that I'm saying, but as you can see, my opinion is straightforward. I think professional wrestling in regards to the women's wrestling should drop its emphasis put on women's wrestling. It's not to suggest that women should not wrestle anymore, but the emphasis that's been put on professional wrestling in regards to the women, in regards to how they've been promoting it, and when I say promoting, I mean blatant propaganda, has need to cease, and it needs to cease immediately. It has obviously peaked and it's declined, and we have gotten to the point in 2022 to that we've now seen alternatives and actually exemplifying where the women should be going, objectively speaking, in regards to the future of professional wrestling versus what we've been seeing throughout 2022 as far as the peak that happened the previous years that show you that it's not in any better shape just because of the politicization of professional wrestling in 2022, stemming all the way back into 2014 when the start of the so-called women's revolution happened. So before I show you the statistics, I'm going to just give you my opinion straight up. Again, it may sound subjective. It's subjective in nature because this is a choice that anyone can concede to, or you can have your own alternative opinion opposing said viewpoint. So let's talk about that real quick. How people usually view the women's revolution. Some say that it stems back to when AJ Lee cut that promo on the cast of the Total Divas show. In my opinion, I say that it stems from Emma and Paige overall. When Emma and Paige happened at NXT Arrival back in 2014, in my opinion, that's when the women's revolution started. Now, if you want to argue that it was grandmothered in somewhat with the likes of Trish, with the likes of Lita, Victoria, Mickie James, Molly Holly, all the women that go back to the Ruthless Aggression era period and the late portions of the Attitude era, I can see your argument in regards to that. But obviously there's a big gap in between that portion of time versus this portion of time that a lot of fans at the time had a problem with, being that the women were looked upon as nothing more than eye candy. They didn't have anything in regards to what was actually given to the genre of professional wrestling outside of what they actually showed off in regards to their bodies. And then you get to the 2014 Arrival match between Paige and Emma, and even though you had serious matches and serious feuds between the likes of Trish Stratus and Alita, there's obviously a huge distinction when looking at what the women in 2014 with Paige and Emma. It's an obvious distinction to see the styles of wrestling and the importance given to the match versus what Paige versus what Lita and Trish Stratus did. There's an obvious distinction. There's an obvious contrast as far as the promoting is considered. And as you start to go forward with the likes of Charlotte and Sasha Banks and Bayley and Becky Lynch, also known as the Four Horsewomen, that pretty much ran the roost throughout 2014 in regards to the women's revolution. And then you start to go a little bit more further when they transition over to the main roster. And then you had Asuka, and then you had Ember Moon, and then you start to go a little bit more further, and you start having the women main event shows, and then eventually pay-per-views, and eventually Big Fours, and then eventually you start to get the program with Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey, which took over the better portion of late 2018 to 2019 when I feel the women's revolution hit its peak. And then you started to continue going forward with the Sasha Banks and the Baileys and the overtaking of the NXT tag team titles for the women, and we get it. There's an emphasis put on women's professional wrestling that has been growing and growing and growing for the better part of 10 years. But as I'm going to exemplify for you guys from a statistical standpoint, the growth and the correlation with what I assume to be the women's revolution has to do with you wanting to, or WWE that is, or or wrestling in general, let's just say that, wanting to bring in a more abundance of female viewers. The only problem with that, as the numbers will suggest in two different articles that we're going to read, that it doesn't add up quite as what you think it may be portrayed, because the women overall based off of just overall genetics, don't really care for wrestling at all, no matter how you try to depict it to them. And obviously, I'm not speaking for, I'm not speaking broadly for every individual woman, but average, just speaking from a median standpoint, no, it doesn't work that way, because when it's all said and done, genetically speaking, just like you have gay men don't equal straight men, and there's no straight man in the world who's gonna sit back and watch some show off of fucking Lifetime. And just like the women, you may have some tomboys out there, but not all women are going to sit by and watch wrestling, no matter who's actually doing the wrestling. But apparently we're just going to ignore that. But here I am to display you guys the statistics. Then we're going to read an article, and then I'll go further into my broad interpretation in regards to women's wrestling. So if you click on the description page down below, you'll see an article that talks about the and this is actually a pretty good time to bring up also. After reading these statistics, I've come to the conclusion that the previous videos where I noted that the demographic between the male and the female being 98% versus 2% was horribly wrong. It's not correct. How I actually accounted for those percentages, which is kind of idiotic when I think about it now, the variables made no fucking sense. The variables as to how I came to that conclusion was more or less taking the social media approach strictly towards WWE and seeing the engagement with the female engagement versus the male engagement in regards to just WWE on a domestic level on social media, because I felt that was the biggest platform. But I should have took more accounts into the other variables, whether you're talking about people who are live, who attend live shows, or just overall people who watch it on television or different platforms, or more importantly, taking into consideration every gender demographic across the world that watches professional wrestling, not just domestically on one platform, and conflation with just the United States and WWE by itself. It was really stupid. But at the same time, I read this article already, but I'm going to read an article for you directly after the statistics. And it's not too far off, though. It's not. I'll talk about that in a minute. You'll see what I mean. But yeah, the numbers in itself were wrong. But at the same time, are they wrong? I'll talk more about that in a little bit. The statistics that show the favorability of WWE in the United States by gender does state that it was from January of 2020. But I say, because the article was promoted December 9th, 2022, a couple of weeks ago. But even though it was conducted in 2020, the current viewership numbers right now and the ratings for all of professional wrestling, not just WWE, is very stagnant at the moment. And one may even argue that it probably declined from the last 3 years. So I feel as if this just broader proves my point. So I'm talking from a statistical standpoint as of right now versus at the time. But notice that right now obviously is a decline from what I'm about to read right now. I just want to notate that for you real quick. So it says from the male viewership number versus the female viewership number, or the male gender versus the female gender. I probably should say that, because one of these notes that that they don't actually watch WWE programs. So let's just stick to the program. It says males 14% are very favorable towards WWE versus females are 7% very favorable towards WWE. So essentially they're saying there are 14% of the hardcore fan base versus 7% of the hardcore fan base in, comparison to the males and the females. Somewhat favorable men are 19%, somewhat favorable female are 15%, somewhat unfavorable are 16%, for the males, somewhat unfavorable is 12% for the females. Very unfavorable for the males and the females are both 21%. Net heard of, but they have no opinion, is 24% for the men and 33% for the females, and never heard of is 6% for the men and 13% for the females. And when you take the negative portions of this survey, you will notice that the negative perceptions being the somewhat unfavorable, the very unfavorable, the heard of and no opinion, and the never heard of, but they have no opinion regardless, is 67% towards the females and 67% towards the men and 79% towards the females, which pretty much tells me and indicates that no matter what you promote it in regards to the women's revolution, the female audience simply doesn't care at all. Like, they just don't care. Either they just don't watch the programming in general, or they do watch the programming and it has no effect on them whatsoever. You can expect it to not have an effect on a male, and I'm not talking about your male feminists, I'm talking about on your straight male wrestlers. You can understand that it wouldn't have an effect on them per se, because they don't really care about it. They'll tell you that they care about it on social media and pretend to behind their anonymous potato photo, but in reality, they don't really care. They just say that because they want to feel virtuous. The stats project that. It pretty much tells you that 33% are avid fans from a male standpoint and 21% are avid fans from a female perspective. But is it 21% of avid females? That's where it comes. That's when I said that my 2% factor for the females from an actual numerical standpoint is horribly fucking off, and I wanted to apply context to that. I want to read you another article that kind of proves my point still in regards to the 2%, even though it doesn't necessarily say the number. So there's another article directly under that talks about the WWE demographics, female and male split. This article is also from 2017, so bear with me. But also, just like the last one, the last article we just read, or the last statistics we just read, it also pretty much promotes the same point that I'm trying to build, that one, it declined as far as viewership numbers is considered. So you can argue that the numbers also decline, which further proves my point. But it's more so to illustrate the broader point in regards to how they actually do these statistics overall and how they actually conjure up these numbers in regards to WWE alone. So this article reads, WWE demographics is a subject that seems to come up regularly, and the outstanding question: who is WWE targeting for their shows? I'm not going to read this entire article. I'm just going to read the important parts because it kind of gets a little bit complacent after a while and it repeats itself. Since WWE became a publicly traded company in 1999, they have released a lot more information about their revenue streams and viewership. However, since the audience demographics is not a generally accepted accounting principle, they are very inconsistent about how, when, and why that information is released. In general, we've seen the audience always been at least 60% male. Mind you, this was in 2017. Sometimes the female audience grows in recent years, which I partially credit towards a greater emphasis on serious women's wrestling on WWE programming, along with the addition of several reality shows, Total Divas, Total Bellas, on female-centric E! Network, which brings up one of my main negative points in regards to this article, or negative points in regards to the statistics that was actually given to us that we just got finished reading. So, you've seen the way those stats pointed out, it did not say Raw and SmackDown. It said WWE in general. And what this article is telling me is that they're essentially conflating Total Divas and Total Bellas underneath the WWE umbrella. So when I hear 21%, how did they conduct that survey? Did they point out WWE from a mainline Raw and SmackDown as far as the female viewership number? Or are they strictly talking about, like, when they talk to the female viewers, they go, oh, do you guys like Total Divas? Do you guys like Total Bellas? And they're pointing out affiliates of WWE programming, but they're not talking about Raw and SmackDown. You're talking about Total Divas and Total Bellas, which obviously is going to have a large female base. So I'm asking, that 21% that actually are fans of WWE, are they fans of the mainline programming? That's what we care about. We don't care about subsidiaries. We care about the mainline programming. And this article is stating that's how they actually do their surveys. But it gets better. When WWE is reporting demographic splits, they usually include all programming, see what I mean? Or at least all programming that they can use will paint a picture of a more diverse demographic. See what I mean? They're using this in order to engage their financial quarterlies. This is how they talk to the people that they want to represent these stats to, and they want to build themselves up knowing that they're misinterpreting the facts in order to conjure up this number, when in reality, these numbers don't talk about what the product is known for. You can't conflate Total Divas and Total Bellas and say that you have female WWE fans just because Total Bellas and Total Divas happen to be WWE subsidiaries. That's not what we're talking about, and you know that's not what we're talking about. But it gets even better. It gets even better. There has been talk lately about how a diminishing fan base of young men has resulted in a larger proportion of female fans in the WWE Raw audience. Not necessarily a larger female audience, just a larger proportion of female fans due to the attrition of men. Today, WWE's corporate webpage has a FAQ that asks, who watches WWE programming? With the answer, WWE is watched by 11 million fans each week in the United States alone. Pause. That's another bad thing, because we know they're not watched by 11 million fans, even at the time. They're taking all their numbers from their social medias, and they're also taking all their numbers from their YouTube pages, and they're taking all their numbers from their television, and they're taking the post numbers in regards to the DVR numbers, and they're adding that all up without accounting for the individual person who's watching it. Because you can account for the individual person. I get that. Let me take that back. They are accounting for the individual person. Maybe. But two things. One, how they actually navigate the Nielsen ratings and the Nielsen numbers. They'll actually take a household and then they'll just have an average. Like, say that the house will have a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister, and they will account that household for 4 people who actually watched it. That's one thing. That's very disingenuous how they actually do the Nielsen ratings. They never really account it per household. I thought they did it per household. It's actually per person in the average household is how they account for their numbers. That's one thing. And number two, how they actually conduct this is very disingenuous to me, because it says 11 million, but not only did I just notate all the things and all the factors that they talk about, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, right? So as we talked about with the Nielsen numbers, you have 4 people in each household who actually, like, how do I put this? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around this. You say that it's 11 million fans each week. Oh, did I touch on that already when I said that they actually account for all the, oh yeah. How do you know the same person isn't watching the program multiple times on, say, YouTube? Because does YouTube, I don't think YouTube makes a distinction overall. As far as, like, say that there's 10 million fans, right? 10 million viewers. How many people watch the video? Or you even have people who make jokes about that in comment sections when they say things like, oh, I'll probably be the one that accounted for like 300,000 views of this video because it's so good. You know what I mean? How do you know how many people actually watch the video? I guarantee you people who watch my videos, like, say that I have like 2,000 views. I guarantee you out of those 2,000 views, like, I get like 100 comments every day on one video, sometimes like between 50 to 100 comments. I guarantee you out of those 50 to 100 comments, you got about 20 people in those comments who probably watched the video about 3 or 4 times. You know what I mean? Like, that's a very disingenuous way as far as how you account for it also. But it gets even worse. It continues down this path that makes no sense to me. Our diverse audience spans generations of fans. Approximately 36% of WWE's audience is female, and 17% are under the age of 18. And then they start going into this disingenuous, I hate how they did these numbers. Covering a period of November 2014 to November 2015, WWE broke out their audience such: 63% male and 37% female. And then they said that 38% are 50 plus, 21% are 35 to 49, 23% are 18 to 34, 18% are 2 to 7. But they don't correlate what percentage equals what gender. So it doesn't say 38% and then it says 19 to, say, I don't know, 19 to what 18, I think will be 38. That's 18 plus 19. No, it'd be 19 plus 19. And let's say like 19% is male, 19% is female. No, it just says 38% is both of them combined. Like, it makes no sense. And they do this throughout the entire fucking article as far as the presentation is considered. And I hate that. It doesn't really give you an accurate number. But then it gets even fucking worse. In terms of independent research, Scarborough Research published a research in 2013 covering more than 200,000 U.S. residents age 18 and older living in 77 of the country's biggest markets and looking at gender, age, education for fans, boxing, UFC, and WWE. And the results were summarized in April 22nd of 2013 issue of Sports Daily. And it paints out the picture that's been the same for the better part of, 10 years now? That says 62% of men are WWE and 37% are women, as we accounted for in the last article also. According to June 25th, 2007, which was around the time when Benoit died, the article called Wrestling Market Muscle and Broadcasting and Cable in 2006, a Wake Forest University Medical Center survey found that teens who watch wrestling, particularly females, were more prone to instigate violence when they date. Okay, that's stupid. Who cares about that? Okay, no, but going a little bit further down, in 2005, WWE released, this is what I want to talk about. In 2005, WWE released, which is actually, if you guys care about that violence thing, that's pretty interesting, right? But we're not here to talk about that. In 2005, WWE released a primer about the company, which summarized Nielsen media research as 71% male, 29% female. Think about that for a second. In 2005, WWE released a primer about the company, which summarized Nielsen media research as 71% male and 29% female. And it actually does show something that says 73% are older than 18 and 30. And even though this does favor my narrative, I'm not going to use it because, again, it's just like the above research where it doesn't indicate how much of a percentage is for the male and for the females. Again, I really, really hate how they actually fucking indicated these numbers. They're so stupid. But in my opinion, this is the most detrimental point of the article. And this is why I don't know if that survey that I just discussed is highly accurate. And why I say that 2% still sounds about right. Dave Meltzer notes in the February 18, 2002 issue, mind you, this was 20 years ago at the peak. Like at the peak of wrestling viewership numbers. Well, it probably declined by that point. I take that back, but still way more higher than what you see nowadays. So imagine the numbers nowadays. Dave Meltzer notes in the February 18, 2002 issue of the Wrestling Observer newsletter that the Stephanie and Triple H wedding angle on Raw on February 11, 2002 against the Olympics caused a large increase in female viewers, while there was a huge decrease among male viewers who were likely switching to the Olympics. There was an interesting ratings change where the bikini contest between Stacey and Tori on Raw actually lost 125,000 viewers from the previous segment, which Dave attributed to the greater composition of female viewers on that night, meaning that they were watching the wedding segment because it's a wedding. Obviously, that's something that women like to see. And then they lost it when they got to the bikini contest with Sable and Stacey. But the men weren't there because they were watching the Olympics, meaning that there were more women watching that night. And March 10th through the 20th of 2000, WCW commissioned a likability study of the WCW email database list, which was administered by LA's Grace Market Research. They collected 1,400 completed surveys. It was 92% male and 8% female, with 83% adult and 17 non-adult. Which, again, look at these numbers and the way I'm going to stop right here also because it goes a little bit more deeper into the same stuff. The way they're indicating these surveys, like, so what are you saying? It says, mind you, again, this was 20 years ago, but at the same time, they're not really adding any discrepancy between the surveys that were matching with this one versus earlier in the portion of the article versus the previous article. Now you're saying it was 92% male and 8% with 8% female with an 83% adult and 17% non-adult. So what are you trying to say? Like, the way it reads, it's like you're not so it's already bad enough that you're suggesting that the 21% within that last survey somehow has the affiliations of Total Divas and Total Bellas already within it. But also, how many of those women, because they're saying that 17% are adults, so, or 17% is non-adults, right? And conflation with the males and the females. They didn't actually talk about, like, when you look at, because you talk about the men and the women overall when watching professional wrestling, you know, there are some kids in there, but at the same time, you can make a notion that adult men watch professional wrestling. You already exposed the fact that you're talking about Total Divas and Total Bellas in regards to conflating it with WWE programming overall. You know, no fucking men watches that, so that's mainly women. Now, for the rest of the percentages, how many of those girls are below the fucking age of 18? Like, I want to know that number. They don't tell you that number. That's the kind of shit that I'm talking about. So we already accounted for the fact that 21% is discussing overall WWE programming. Now I would like to know the number as far as the age is considered. Because of course you're going to have girls who are younger who like professional wrestling, because that's just a kid's thing. Kids like wrestling. But when you get older, especially around 18, probably a hell of a lot younger than that, probably when you get around the age, if you're a little girl, I guarantee you, if you watched wrestling with your brothers at like 9 or 8 years old, you grow out of that shit by the time you hit around 12. Trust me. So how many people below the age of 17 are girls, and above the age of 17, how many of them are still watching wrestling? I would like to know that number, but they don't really portray that at all. But that brings up a broader point, as I said before, in regards to the women's wrestling, just to cap this all off. I look at all the things that are going on, whether you're talking about the wedding segment with Triple H back in 2002, whether you're talking about the declining numbers in regards to professional wrestling in conjunction with what's currently going on and compared to what the women are currently doing, no one cares about women wrestling. No one cares about wrestling in general. I get that. But even within the hardcore fan base, even within the engagement of it, you're not really reciprocating any of that stuff back. But when you go check out the viewership numbers overall, yes, females aren't watching stripteases and bikinis and stuff like that, but they're also not watching women's wrestling. But you have the men who are not watching the women's wrestling, but you risk all of that for the women, when in reality, you could bring back the bikini contest and at least the men will watch in greater numbers, is what it's indicating. And again, obviously, you have some individual females who absolutely indeed enjoy the women's wrestling. But then I have to ask, what is the women doing? Why do you I gotta ask a question. I gotta ask, what is the women doing in professional wrestling that get you to engage with them specifically compared to what the men are doing, but they're doing it much better because they're biologically, naturally better athletes, meaning they can pull off more complicated. If your thing is the in-ring wrestling, they could pull off more complicated stunts and do it better than the women. So what is the aesthetic and what is the draw towards the women when none of them have any character, essentially, just like the men, but you have more characters because there's just essentially more numbers within the men, and they're all of them naturally better than the women at the actual in-ring aspect. I just don't get it. Like, why? And then when you actually conflate that with the numbers, you're getting nothing out of it. But when I look at the OnlyFans stuff, I see women making 6 figures. Some of them, what it sounds like, they're on the progress towards the road of making 7 figures. So clearly there's money on the table to be made in regards to wanting to see more sex appeal. Can you, I need someone to explain this to me. No one is winning in the end of the day, whether you're talking about the fans overall, where in reality, you don't care about the women's wrestling. You're only saying this for politicized reasons. But the numbers indicate that you truly don't feel that way. This is not me saying it, and I can't spot any of you individually, but the general consensus is that you guys don't naturally feel that fucking way. But I look at the previous years, and even though the women don't care either way, it suggests that the men actually did care when the sex appeal was on the forefront with the women. So what are we doing here in the end of the day? What are we doing here in the end? You know what we should do? Less emphasis on women's wrestling. This is not me saying this because I'm trying to be snide, and this is not me saying this because I'm trying to be a dick. I'm saying this for the greater good. I'm saying this because this is what professional wrestling needs to go into. You look at my banner on my YouTube channel, it says to make wrestling great again. That's what I'm here for, to make wrestling great again. It's not to say that the women can't wrestle. It's not to say that maybe if they have something going on that's intriguing enough that they shouldn't wrestle. Because the intriguing aspect is what's going to get you to want to watch. Notice the wedding segment that they pointed out with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon in 2002. The only reason why the men weren't there was because of the Olympics, whereas the women turned in to watch it. You have character development, you have story. That's what counts at the end of the day, not the wrestling. And if you want to talk about the bikini contest and stuff like that, that's what attracts the men. You don't need story for that. You don't need, even though you could probably get a story out of that too if you really want to. That's what we care about. That's what wrestling fans care about. You can stick there and you can argue virtue all you want to, but we have the numbers on our side. How about you? Go in the comment section. This should be very, very interesting. I'm asking you, just combat what I'm saying from a numerical standpoint. I debunked myself in regards to my previous numbers, and I provided new information that I feel has clarity in regards to the situation. I didn't see anything disparaging, did I? Did I? Or did I just follow the tracks? You can't get mad at information. Just tell me, why do we need women's wrestling when it's obviously not working and we have men's wrestling? And tell me why we can't go down this path in this direction in regards to sexual appeal when it's clearly working on an individual level, but we're not doing it because politics? I'm confused. Help me. Help me out here. As always, my name is Millennial Smark, and I'll catch you guys later. Deuces. P.I.S.